Here's that the imprisoned murderer, Dr. Jeffrey MacDonald, has about 3 years to live or less. Okay, so this might be a good time to kind of review the crime that he committed and um, perhaps just take a second look at it. Okay, most people know that he was convicted after 9 years. 9 years of freedom. He was convicted of having murdered his pregnant wife. She was about 4.5 months pregnant. Colette was her name, and his daughters. One of them was a 5-year-old Kimberly, and 2.5-year-old Christy. And in a very bloody and brutal way, they were all murdered. And his explanation was that his house had been invaded by a bunch of people. Most people call them hippies, but he actually didn't say they were hippies. So they were clean cut. The males were clean cut looking. And that a female was in there holding a candle chanting, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." Okay. And also the word pig was written in bed and the headboard of his wife, the bed that he and his wife shared, which was reminiscent of what happened at the Sharon Tate massacre, when the word pig was written in her blood. Okay, now there have been several books written about it, the most famous being Fatal Vision by Joe McGinnis. I read a review by Josephine Henton in the New Republic called Our All-American Atrocity, and I think that gets closer to explaining this horrible crime than even the books have, including Joe McGinnis's book. Okay, there have been books that have questioned whether or not he's guilty. They think that there actually were people who invaded the house. I don't think that's very likely. In fact, I think it's almost impossible. I say almost because you have to, you always have to qualify it, but okay. She says, MacDonald was both good enough and too good to be true. Here was a winner, a football player and star high school student from a working class background who had won a scholarship to Princeton and married his pretty, socially superior high school sweetheart. Okay, he was a doctor, he was in the Green Berets. He just seemed to be the all-American boy. Okay. Now, and she talks about how there's an extraordinary gap between what he was and, what he apparently did on that horrible night. Okay. And she writes, he and his act exist in an elaborate relation of paradox. The slayer of children who is an expert on child abuse, the creator of bloody crisis, who expertly redeems others from bloody trauma. These are selves existing in a tight, explicit relationship, whose terms, if not conventionally rational, are not inexplicable either. And she talks about how the crime seems to her, and seems to me as well, because I think that her review is spot on, to dramatize crises of authority and vulnerability as experienced in marriage. Okay, he wanted to be a type, a all-American boy type. Okay, and she writes that stereotypes gave him his notion of a coherent world. To be an intellectual John Wayne, a Green Beret paratrooper, also a brilliant surgeon, that was a fantasy he could fulfill. But if society had given him a winning definition of what it meant to be a man at war or at work, it had failed to provide a comparable guide to intimacy. His perception of relations between the sexes is the sort to be found in old football movies. His woman must be beautiful and bright, a cheerleader whose intelligence is devoted to ingenious praise. And indeed, as she writes, Colette had written him adoring letters talking about the wonderful moments he had created for the two of them. Okay, now on the night of the murders, somebody testified, or somebody told investigators that they heard Colette's voice raised in anger. In silencing that voice and reducing her to nothing, MacDonald, in effect, restored her to being all, to being his epitome of womanhood, as he described her. And the case also resembles that of the Jean Harris's the killing of her. I'm not sure it was a murder. The killing of the Scarsdale diet doctor, Dr. Herman Tarnauer. Both killers seem to have to destroy the victims in order to save them as an ideal. Okay, and I think Hendon is right in that insisting on his innocence, insisting that his good, clean, all-American family were attacked by counterculture druggies. He is less of a hypocrite than a kind of ideologue trying to establish the perfection of his family and the the goodness of the wife that he murdered. Okay, and I hope you like what you saw and heard and saw. Will subscribe to my channel.